Unlimited.
Even the mighty might not see it coming. It's prediabetes, and it captures 1 in 3 adults. But you can escape. Take the 1-minute prediabetes risk test to know where you stand and prevent or delay type 2 diabetes. Be your own hero on smartphones everywhere at doihaveprediabetes.org.
Spectrum News Plus. Local stories, connecting communities. Streaming now on the Spectrum News app and free with your Spectrum subscription.
I'm Sharon Tazwell. Here's your Spectrum News in 90. The death toll rising after Helene made landfall Thursday night in Florida as a Category 4 hurricane. And the impacts are widespread and ongoing. Multiple states recorded more than a foot of rain as storm surge and even tornadoes left behind a trail of destruction. Millions in the southeast are without power.
We are continuing to restore and perform damage assessment, especially in those hardest hit areas that sustained flooding.
In Tennessee, terrifying moments caught on video after more than 50 people were left stranded on the roof of a hospital. The group was forced to climb to the top of the building after fast rising floodwaters impacted evacuation plans. Authorities used helicopters to rescue many of those stranded. Elsewhere in the state, residents were evacuated after catastrophic flooding took over several small towns. New legal problems for disgraced music mogul Sean Combs, known as Diddy. A new lawsuit filed Friday against Combs alleges the 56-year-old drugged and sexually assaulted a woman on multiple occasions from 2020 to 2024. It's the 12th misconduct lawsuit against Combs, who is currently behind bars after being indicted on federal charges, including racketeering and sex trafficking. He has pleaded not guilty to those charges. Those are your headlines. Now, here's your weather on the ones.
Hey everybody, I'm meteorologist Nate Harrington. The remnants of Helene continue to spin in the Ohio River Valley, but long after this storm is gone, the story of Helene will be the catastrophic flooding, the storm surge from the Gulf Coast, and obviously the heavy rainfall, river flooding, and mountain flooding in Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. A devastating storm and one for the books. So the remnants continue to bring rain in the Ohio River Valley, but quiet weather for the rest of the country. We're also tracking the tropics too, coming up in 10 minutes.
Welcome to The Big Deal. I'm Errol Lewis, national political anchor at Spectrum News. Every week, we look at some of the biggest issues facing our nation and the road to the White House. This week, the economy and immigration took center stage as the presidential candidates traveled nationwide presenting their proposals on those issues. Former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris both delivered speeches on the economy, with Trump focusing on farming and Harris leaning into ways to help the middle class. And then Harris traveled to the southern border in Arizona, her first visit as the Democratic nominee, while Trump held a press conference in New York City attacking her record and calling for more restrictive policies, including mass deportations and detention centers. Meanwhile, the vice presidential candidates were also busy on the campaign trail as they prepared to take the debate stage on Tuesday. We will bring you a preview of that later in tonight's show. But first, here's a look at some of the key moments in politics from this week.
I have pledged that building a strong middle class will be a defining goal of my presidency.
Kamala Harris is the tax queen, and she's coming for your money, she's coming for your pensions, and she's coming for your savings.
I am in favor of the Second Amendment, and I believe we need to reinstate the assault weapons ban.
I can say it for everything. Why didn't she fix it almost 4 years ago?
I've been proud to stand with Ukraine. I will continue to stand with Ukraine, and I will work to ensure Ukraine prevails in this war.
And so we have a very good relationship. And I also have a very good relationship, as you know, with President Putin. And I think if we win, I think we're going to get it resolved very quickly.
I will be pragmatic in my approach. I will engage in what Franklin Roosevelt called bold, persistent experimentation.
She wants to see if she could make up some lies, like she said about the border bill that Trump stopped. Let me tell you, number one, I didn't stop it. The senators stopped it.
Joining me now with some political analysis are two top commentators. Susan Arbetter is a political anchor for Spectrum News 1 in Albany, New York. Taylor Popolars is the Spectrum News national political reporter joining us from Washington, D.C. And Susan, Donald Trump has been attacking Kamala Harris for months about immigration and border security. And with less than 40 days until Election Day, Harris has been answering back this week by visiting the southern border and accusing Trump of playing politics with the immigration issue. Is drawing attention to the border a risky move for Kamala Harris?
You know, I don't think so at all, Errol. She really has to address this issue broadly, since it's one of the top issues that voters say is important to them. She is indeed weak on the border because the Biden administration delayed responding to what was clearly a crisis for almost a year, and she owns that failure as a member of his administration. But this is an opportunity to break with Biden and sound tougher on the southern and the northern border than he has. The challenge for her, I think, will be to thread the needle between talking tough about illegal border crossings and sounding compassionate about what is really terrible and unsafe situations that many of the migrants are running from. She does have one arrow in her quiver, and that is her opponent, Donald Trump, publicly killed a bipartisan deal in Congress that would have stopped the border crossings, and she can use that this trip to highlight that.
Okay, now Taylor, you have been spending some time in Pennsylvania this week. You spoke to a number of voters. Let's take a listen to some of what they told you.
I lived 4 years under the Trump administration, and everything was more affordable. It was positive. I felt like our country was safer.
The people have learned from their lessons, not in a way that's going to help them flip stay within flipping this county, but in a way that say, hey, we're not going back to that.
I don't like my choices at all. I will do a write-in, which will be my own name.
So I know you were out there in Erie County where they went for Donald Trump in 2016 and then for Biden in 2020. How are the voters feeling about the economy out there?
Yeah, it's such a fascinating place to visit, Errol, because before the county flipped for Trump, it voted for Obama twice in 2008 and 2012. But as you just heard from those voters, there's a pretty clear divide. We found frustrated voters who don't want to support either. We found a lot of Kamala Harris supporters and a lot of Donald Trump supporters. In terms of the economy, you heard it from the at the top who is a Trump supporter. Any Trump fan that I speak with brings up the economy first and foremost as why they support the former president, because whether it reflects reality or not, they feel that their life is more expensive now than it was when he was in office 4 years ago. In terms of Harris supporters, there is an acknowledgement that the economy has been tough the last couple of years, that things have been more expensive, but they argue that Harris, along with President Joe Biden, have been working to make things more affordable and have been working to lower costs. And we hear the Vice President talk about that on the trail every single day. But I think that in a place like Erie, a former manufacturing community that's kind of lost its footing economically and has experienced population decline as well as job decline, the economy is front and center there for people, and they're trying to figure out their futures and how a presidential candidate might be able to help them out. I think it's one of the reasons that area has flipped back and forth over the last few election cycles, because people are frustrated and they're willing to give someone a chance. That county is only one of 2 Pennsylvania counties out of all 67 that voted for Obama, then Trump, then Biden. Our colleague Cassie Simeon is in that other county, Northampton, which is on the eastern side of the Commonwealth. So it's interesting to pick voters' brains, but you hear a lot about the economy there.
Well, and Taylor, I mean, foreign policy was also on the agenda this week. Both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. How did those meetings indicate what the candidates would do about the Russian invasion of Ukraine?
It was really a stark contrast on display. Nothing really surprising because both Trump and Harris have really made clear how they feel about Ukraine and its war against Russia. Trump argues that if he were in office right now, the war, he'd be able to solve it just like that, though he continues to not really offer a plan for how he would approach it. And when he met with Zelensky, he said that I have a good relationship with him, but I also have a good relationship with Putin. Harris, meanwhile, met with Zelensky, and she sharply criticized how Trump and his running mate, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, talk about the idea of maybe Ukraine has to give up some of its land in order to secure a deal with Russia to end this war. And Harris said the only person who agrees with that is Russian President Vladimir Putin, and she said it would be a surrender and that she thought it was a sharp contrast. But Zelensky, he was here in America trying to advocate for more aid, and if there's any indication about how competitive this race is, he felt the need to meet with both of them as he continues to try to figure out who will be in office come January. Okay, and now, Susan, there's a lot happening in New York City this week. The mayor, Eric Adams, was actually indicted and arraigned. He was put through the system of federal bribery and corruption charges he now faces. Walk us through what went down.
Well, as you mentioned, the sitting mayor of New York City was indicted on federal charges. They include bribery, wire fraud, illegal campaign donations, seeking illegal campaign donations. Adams was arraigned today, pleading not guilty. I believe he is the first sitting New York City mayor to be charged with a crime, and he is now due back in court next Wednesday. The indictment alleges that Adams sought and accepted improper benefits, like, for example, business class airfare on the Turkish national airline worth about $15,000, and for which he was initially only charged $50. That's 50. And in exchange, he was asked to do favors for Turkish government officials. Now, interestingly, Adams, like Donald Trump, is claiming that the Justice Department's investigation is payback for his criticism of the Biden administration's migrant policies, which we were just talking about, which have cost the city billions of dollars.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you very much, Susan. Thank you, Taylor. We're going to take a break now, and when we come back, we'll talk about growing concerns in the Republican Party about non-citizen voting. Stay with us. The 2024 election will decide who leads our nation and the balance of power in Congress, impacting all of us. From Capitol Hill to the Oval Office, let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth coverage with our dedicated experts in local politics. Strengthening democracy by informing your community. That's our mission. Available on all of your favorite devices, exclusively on Spectrum.
What if you never had to worry about what you could do? Because you could do anything. Anywhere could be the center of everywhere. And boundaries only existed to be pushed. So the only limit you faced was how big you could dream. What would you do then? Some pretty cool stuff, I bet. Yeah, that'd be some life. That'd be life unlimited.
I'm an ex-drug dealer, and I'll be your sub today. Two milligrams of fentanyl can be lethal. A lethal dose is in here. Who gets it, I won't know.
It's cheap, it's potent, and it's profitable. The sad reality is fentanyl is being mixed into everything now.
More kitchen now.
You're not gonna get it all right. Just make sure you nail the big stuff.
Mama!
Like making sure your kids are in the right seat for their age and size. Get it right at nhtsa.gov/the-right-seat.
We're back with The Big Deal. I'm Errol Lewis. Over the last few weeks, we have been looking at ballot questions that will give voters a chance to decide on consequential issues in November. In 8 states, constitutional amendments designed to prevent non-citizens from voting in federal elections will appear on the ballot. That includes Idaho and Iowa, Kentucky, Missouri, North Carolina, Oklahoma, South Carolina, and Wisconsin, all of them states that have Republican-led legislatures. Voters in North Dakota and Colorado, Alabama and Louisiana, Florida and Ohio have previously passed amendments which restrict voting only to citizens. The thing about that is, non-citizen voting has been illegal in the United States everywhere since 1996, and election experts say that it rarely takes place. Yet the issue has emerged as an election year talking point for former President Donald Trump.
Our elections are bad. And a lot of these illegal immigrants coming in, they're trying to get them to vote.
Donald Trump is not alone. The Republican Party has raised concerns about the possibility of non-citizens voting in November following an influx of migrants at the southern border over the last few years. In addition to constitutional amendments on state ballots, Republican officials have also launched reviews of voter rolls in an effort to prevent non-citizen voting, including in the state of Texas. Spectrum News reporter Barbara Fox has that story in this report.
Last month, Texas Governor Greg Abbott touted the removal of over 1 million people from the state's voter registration lists.
The vast majority of the removals in Texas are due to death or people who've moved.
That's Quinn Raymond. He's the co-founder of Vote Shield. It's an organization that works to protect U.S. elections. He says while the governor is trying to take the credit, states are required to maintain voter registration lists, adding this is nothing new.
What it comes down to is there's a federal law called the NVRA that requires that every county in Texas, all 254 of them, do a list maintenance on a regular basis.
According to the governor's office, more than 6,500 potential non-citizens have been removed from the voter rolls since 2021. This includes 1,930 people who have a voter history and have been referred for investigation by the Attorney General's office.
The alleged non-citizen removals in the voter records here are just 0.03% of all the voter records in the state. So this is a very small number of records. And Texas needs to be especially careful when flagging non-citizens for removal, because as you may know, back in 2019, the state falsely claimed that 95,000 non-citizens were registered to vote.
Raymond is referring to the effort that took place back in 2019 to find non-citizen voters on voter rolls. According to NPR, Texas state officials questioned the citizenship of about 98,000 voters. NPR reported that a federal judge in Texas ruled that state officials mistakenly concluded that many of those voters were not eligible to cast ballots. Now, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton is urging the Texas Secretary of State to request citizenship data from the Biden administration to identify potential ineligible voters before the 2024 election. In a press release, the governor says illegal voting in Texas will never be tolerated. We will continue to actively safeguard Texans' sacred right to vote while also aggressively protecting our elections from illegal voting. Barbara Fox, Spectrum News.
Joining me now to talk more about non-citizen voting is Jonathan Diaz, the Director of Voting Advocacy and Partnerships at the Campaign Legal Center, a nonpartisan organization that advocates for Americans to participate in the democratic process. And Jonathan, critics are calling crackdowns on non-citizen voting really a solution in search of a problem. From your research, is there substantial data or proof that shows that non-citizen voting is a major problem in the United States?
I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. It really isn't. Like you said in the introduction, voting by non-U.S. citizens is already illegal for federal elections all across the country. And we have pretty sophisticated safeguards both at the voter registration stage and in the ballot verification process to make sure that only eligible citizens are voting. So I see this recent push by politicians like Greg Abbott and Ken Paxton as really nothing more than a partisan political narrative aimed at drumming up false concerns about the security of our election system to justify efforts to make voting harder.
Well, yeah, let's talk about the voter registration reviews that are going on in a number of states like Ohio. Ohio identified almost 600 non-citizens who have registered to vote, but that's out of 8 million voters, so it amounts to less than 1/100th of 1%. Is it even worth chasing down such small numbers?
Well, I mean, if you look at the numbers and assume that they got them all exactly right, you're right that it's an incredibly small percentage of voters. But I don't even think that we can make that assumption when states like Ohio and Texas claim that they've identified alleged non-citizens on their rolls. More often than not, in my experience, what they're really doing is identifying naturalized citizens, people who were not U.S. citizens at one point, but then became U.S. citizens and then registered to vote. And they're subjecting those people, who are the only people in America who affirmatively opted in to become U.S. citizens, who took a test, subjecting those people to additional scrutiny, to having them jump through administrative hoops to stay registered. In Texas, in 2019, they identified tens of thousands of naturalized citizens and threatened them not only with removal from the voter rolls, but with criminal prosecution. My organization, Campaign Legal Center, was one of the ones that filed a lawsuit against Texas in response to that activity. And one of my clients, an immigrant from the United Kingdom who was the spouse of a U.S. military member, testified really movingly on the stand about how hurtful it was to have the state come after her after she had become a U.S. citizen, just because they'd done some faulty data matching. And it scares people. It has a chilling effect on voter participation, and it infringes on the constitutional rights of naturalized citizens to participate in our elections.
Okay, so now let's look at another wrinkle in this. Right now, non-citizens are in fact allowed to vote in a handful of local elections. There's a handful of cities and municipalities in 3 states, including Washington, D.C., but they're not allowed to vote in 8 states where constitutional amendments will appear on the ballot. So what exactly is the goal of passing more of these ballot amendments? So is the goal to sort of increase voter turnout? Is that what Donald Trump is trying to do?
Well, I think the goal of these non-citizen voting amendments, there are 2. The first is to play on people's fears. Immigration is a hot button political topic. And so I do think that it's possible that some of these things are being put on the ballot to drive turnout by people who are concerned about this false narrative of non-citizen voting. But the second is to prevent local governments from allowing non-U.S. citizens to participate in local elections. Things like mayor or school board or city council. There are some municipalities across the country that have started to allow non-citizen residents to participate in elections in their towns or cities. But even in those places, non-U.S. citizens are still prohibited from voting in statewide or federal elections. So we're talking about a really small number of towns, and these state legislatures, largely conservative state legislatures, preventing local governments in their states from deciding how to organize their own elections.
Okay, Jonathan Diaz, thanks very much. We're not done just yet. Coming up next, we will preview next week's vice presidential debate happening in New York City. Stay with us.
For the millions of school-aged children across the country, the state of their schools can have a lasting impact on their health and well-being.
The majority of school districts aren't doing comprehensive regular water quality testing.
As CO2 levels rise in a space, cognitive function takes a direct decline.
We visit 2 school districts working to create safe and healthy environments for their students.
Watch Exploring Your Health, Curing Our Classrooms, available on the Spectrum News app.
Never have to worry about thinking too big?
because you have a connection that's ready for anything. That's life unlimited. That's Spectrum.
I tell my son, I love you every single day. I love you. Now, my dad has never said that to me. Not because he doesn't love me, but because culturally it wasn't comfortable for him. Now that he's a grandfather, he says, I love you to my son every time he sees him. My advice to all the fathers out there, forget the cultural restrictions. They grow up way too fast for you to waste even a single precious moment.
Food isn't just fuel to live, it's fuel to grow. My family relied on public assistance to help provide meals for us. These meals fueled my involvement in theater and the arts as a child, which fostered my love for acting. The Feeding America network of food banks helps millions of people put food on the table. When people are fed, futures are nourished. Join the movement to end hunger, and together we can open endless possibilities for people to thrive. Visit feedingamerica.org/actnow.
We're back with The Big Deal. I'm Errol Lewis. On Tuesday, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Ohio Senator J.D. Vance are set to face off in the only scheduled vice presidential debate. It's taking place at CBS News studios in New York City. This comes 3 weeks after Kamala Harris and Donald Trump took the debate stage in Philadelphia. Now, according to the rules of the debate, Walz and Vance will stand behind lecterns for the entire 90 minutes. That happens to be the first time since 2008 that vice presidential candidates have not been seated during a debate, and their microphones will be on for the entire time, according to CBS News. Joining me now with a preview of next week's Big Deal is Bob Hart. He is Spectrum News political director. And Bob, what influence do these vice presidential debates have on the outcome of the race for president?
So it's usually only a negative, really. If one of the candidates sort of belly flops on stage, polls have shown that it has hurt the top of the ticket. Dan Quayle did not help George Bush, but George Bush still won. Bob Dole was sort of a hatchet man for Gerald Ford. A lot of people think that his debate performance hurt Ford at the top of the ticket. And of course, Sarah Palin and John McCain, the same thing. And it's because voters aren't looking for geographic balance. They're looking for the judgment that the presidential nominee has. This is the first quasi-presidential decision that the candidate is making. This is the person who I trust. And if the voters look at that person on the debate stage and say that person didn't do so well, they wonder about the top of the ticket.
What do we know so far about how the candidates are preparing for this big debate?
So Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg is the stand-in for J.D. Vance, and Tom Emmer, the Minnesota congressman, is the stand-in for Walz. So they overlapped, Walz and Emmer, in the House, so presumably that will help Vance as he moves forward.
And polls don't tell you everything, but polls suggest that one of these candidates really has a likability or favorability problem going into the debate.
Correct. Vance's net disapproval is much higher than Walz. Walz has a net approval. So I think, honestly, it will be a win for J.D. Vance if he comes out just okay in this debate. If he comes off like a hatchet man, like I was mentioning with Bob Dole, that could hurt Donald Trump at the top of the ticket.
Okay, high stakes. Thank you very much, Bob. And of course, we'll be airing that debate in its entirety on Spectrum News on Tuesday at 8:45 p.m. Eastern Time, along with some on-the-ground reporting and analysis from our team of political commentators. Until then, thank you all for joining us on The Big Deal. Stay tuned to your local station.
Friday nights, The Big Deal with Errol Lewis, where Spectrum News' local political journalists break down the most important issues shaping our nation.
Here's the deal. People need a place to explore national issues that have an impact on their community. To understand those issues better, we're bringing together our team of local political journalists from across the country to break down what's happening. So join us every week to catch up on the key stories making a big difference across the nation and in your local community.
Watch The Big Deal with Errol Lewis Friday nights at 9 Eastern, 8 Central on Spectrum News Plus. Available on all of your favorite devices, exclusively on Spectrum.
At Spectrum Enterprise, we give over 80% of the Fortune 500 the technology solutions they need to meet their growing business demands. Whether it's ultra-fast connectivity, seamless transactions, safe and secure data, or reliable always-on technology, these businesses demand better, and we're here to deliver it. Get a network you can rely on with our 100% uptime SLA guarantee.
Whether it's our stories, the warmth of our laugh, or our family's secret sauce, we all bring something different to the table. So make some space. The power of connection is waiting right outside your comfort zone. Learn how you can help strengthen your community at belongingbeginswithus.org/teamup.
Sometimes in life, in order to move forward, it helps to look back.
To learn from the pioneers and trailblazers.
To gain inspiration from those who came before us.
To show us what it means to act with empathy and to show that love has no labels.
Join WWE and Love Has No Labels throughout the year in celebrating people from all communities and heritages.
Because when love has no labels,
that's a love we can all fight for.
Spectrum News Plus. Local stories, connecting communities. Streaming now on the Spectrum News app and free with your Spectrum subscription.